Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone, and day one of free agency is in the books, and a lot happened. There were role players switching hands, a big-time blockbuster deal between the Denver Nuggets and the Brooklyn Nets. The Houston Rockets are loading up out west. The Atlanta Hawks are suddenly one of the best teams in the East, it feels like, and everything in between, big losers, big winners, and a lot of deals leading up to today that I also want to talk about, things I haven't gotten the chance to discuss in a video yet. So I'm going to go ahead and break down every single thing that happened day one of free agency, a lot to talk about, so I won't be too long in this intro, but leave a like, subscribe if you enjoy, and let me know down below in the comments what you think the best and the worst move was of day one of free agency. Let's kick it off with the blockbuster deal. Cam Johnson is going to the Denver Nuggets for Michael Porter Jr. and a 2032 first round pick from the Denver Nuggets. This is massive news, and I like it a lot for both sides. For the Denver Nuggets, Cam Johnson profiles somewhat similarly to Michael Porter Jr., except Cam Johnson, I believe, is a better defender. I think he's a better connecting player when it comes to playmaking and attacking off the dribble. I feel like he's just going to fit better in that system, be a lot more of a steady force than Michael Porter Jr., who had these ridiculous highs, but also these really low lows that showed up throughout the playoffs this past season and all throughout his tenure with the Denver Nuggets. Also, more injury concerns when it comes to Michael Porter Jr., a larger contract on each of the last two seasons of Cam Johnson's contract, this one and next year. They're going to save $14 million, which makes things a lot easier in this new CBA tax apron era. I think this was a phenomenal move from this new Denver front office to bring in Cam Johnson, who was already putting up numbers somewhat similar to Michael Porter Jr. and with similar efficiency, despite Cam kind of being forced to be this number one option, which isn't his role. And now he gets to play alongside Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. I think he's going to be a seamless fit. And for the Brooklyn Nets, they take on a little bit more money, but a younger player in Michael Porter Jr. who might have a bit more upside and get that 2032 first round pick from the Nuggets. And in 7 years, we have no idea what the Denver Nuggets are going to look like. Jokic is going to be in his mid-30s at that point. I think that's a great investment, a great move to go ahead and make for both sides. So I like this deal quite a bit. Bruce Brown also going to the Denver Nuggets, who just were one of the biggest winners of day one of free agency. I think Bruce Brown, it's not as good as he was when the Nuggets made their championship run, but I still think will be a high-level contributor, one of the better players they've had off the bench in the past couple of seasons. And immediately with those couple of moves and still seemingly more on the horizon for the Denver Nuggets, they immediately have themselves firmly in that tier right behind Oklahoma City in the Western Conference alongside another squad who we will get to here in a little bit. And then on the net side of things, while we're on the topic of them, they also brought back Day'Ron Sharpe, 2 years, $12 million, and Zaire Williams, also 2 years, $12 million. Two young players who I like quite a bit, and I'm glad that they went ahead and brought them back, continuing the continuity with this rebuild. But yeah, right off the bat, the Denver Nuggets made themselves a lot scarier today, and that's coming from an Oklahoma City Thunder fan. Speaking of teams that got a lot scary, the Houston Rockets are maybe the biggest winners of the offseason so far. Dorian Finney-Smith is their big pickup on day one of free agency. 4 years, $53 million, stealing him away from the Los Angeles Lakers and just adding another defender to this team. A reliable knockdown shooter who's going to play so well off of Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun and Amin Thompson, this guy that other teams can't leave open. Finally, the Rockets add another consistent shooter to further bolster that half-court offense that is definitely the biggest area of improvement that is needed to go from last season being a first-round exit to this year potentially competing for a championship. And with having him and now Kevin Durant in the fold too, it really feels like the Rockets, along with the Nuggets, are right there in that second tier in the West of teams that could potentially topple Oklahoma City. And they didn't stop there. They extended Jabari Smith Jr., 5 years, $122 million for him. I think that is a great contract. He's not quite up to that level of pay yet, I don't think, but being an incredibly young player, I imagine he's going to get there, and I think he could far exceed that contract by the end of its term. Jeff Green and Aaron Holiday are back, couple of depth pieces. Clint Capela comes into the fold, which is honestly one of the more confusing moves that happened today. Like, they've already got Sengun, they extended Steven Adams. Clearly, they really like the double big look, and that was one of their more reliable looks in the playoffs last year against the Golden State Warriors. So I guess I get it, but it felt like maybe they could use a little bit more juice at the guard position. I would still like to see them add somebody there, because Reed Shepherd theoretically could be that guy for them off the bench, or an Aaron Holiday, but I don't know. I would just go for like one more veteran piece if you could find somebody, just to ensure that you have someone who can contribute in some way off the bench at your point guard spot. Although I guess Amin Thompson's going to run that somewhat Fred VanVleet. Like, they've got ways to make it work, but I don't know. I was just shocked. It was Clint Capela who was making his return to Houston here, but clearly they love the double big look. And I mean, this is going to be a nasty, physical, defensive-minded team that brings in a high-level scorer in Kevin Durant. Could get a lot of improvement from their young guys. If you ask me, biggest winners from day one of free agency and really just to start this offseason in general, it's the Houston Rockets #1 and probably the Denver Nuggets #2. And as an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, that is a little bit scary. Sticking out west, another team who is highly active today, the Memphis Grizzlies, starting off by extending Jaren Jackson Jr. 5 years, $240 million. It's a lot of money, but Jaren is this consistent defensive player of the year level guy. He's pretty much always in all defensive talks. He's improved a lot as an offensive player. He was their best player a majority of this season, did struggle in the playoffs and kind of down the stretch of the year after the coaching change when they shifted a bit more towards a Ja Morant focused offense like they've been the past few years. But I really feel like Jaren is deserving of a big time payday. It might end up being a little rich in the moment, but he is also still relatively young. Like Jaren's still in his mid-20s. There's room to improve. And I feel like all in all, this is a move the Grizzlies had to make. There was no way you were going to let Jaren Jackson walk or risk underpaying him. I think in the long run, if they can put the right pieces around Ja and Jaren, he can make this contract look pretty good for them when it's all said and done. They also bring back Santi Aldama, 3 years, $52 million. Some people think that's a lot. I think that's perfectly fine for a stretch big of his caliber. Ty Jerome, the big addition for them though. Love this pickup. They do now have quite a few guards between Ty Jerome and Scottie Pippen Jr. and Ja Morant, so maybe a Scottie Pippen Jr. trade is on the horizon to improve in other areas, but just in general, the pickup of Ty Jerome, a very efficient point guard who's really good at operating the pick and roll. That floater is automatic. He's going to give you a really steadying presence off the bench, or even if he starts some games, if Ja Morant deals with injury, which Ja is pretty prone to, Ty Jerome can step in and very easily give them very, very consistent playmaking point guard performance. So I like this pickup a ton, and to get him for less than $10 million a year, I think that is a steal of a contract. Happy for my UVA guy Ty Jerome getting paid, but honestly, I'm surprised they didn't get more. And finally, they bring back Cam Spencer, 2 years, $4.5 million. Fine contract for a young guy who I think could give them a little bit of something off the bench, especially again when you consider the injury history of the Memphis Grizzlies. I think having as much depth as possible is very, very necessary. Then we get to maybe my favorite deal of the entire day when it comes to signings, and that is Nickeil Alexander-Walker to the Atlanta Hawks. 4 years, $62 million. I think that is a phenomenal contract for Nickeil. It's technically a sign and trade with a second-round pick going to Minnesota. I love it. I think he's going to be so good for this Hawks team. A connecting wing that defends really well, that can hit the three ball at a high level, that can put the ball on the deck, that can play make a little bit. He's one of the ideal wings I picture next to Trae Young. And now you think about where these Hawks are going, where they've got Trae Young, Dyson Daniels as a defender in the backcourt, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, another lengthy defender, Jalen Johnson, a really good defender and downhill attacker, Kristaps Porzingis to give a pick and pop threat that can block shots as well. They've still got Onyeka Okongwu. You add Luke Kornet also here on day one of free agency, 1 year, $11 million to give you a shooter off the bench. This Hawks team is going to be really good. Zachary Risachet, too, #1 overall pick, I feel like had a really good season last year. The more that I'm taking a look at the moves that the Hawks have made, the more that I'm starting to convince myself the Hawks could very well be a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference next season. And if they end up in the conference finals, I am not shocked. I think they're building out this great roster, this great recipe with Trae Young, defenders next to him, guys that can knock down perimeter shots, that can put the ball on the deck. He can still handle the ball a majority of times, be this playmaking machine, but now he has more weapons than ever. I'd love to see them add one more guy off the bench as a ball handling guard. And if they can do that, I mean, there's not really a lot to not like about the Atlanta Hawks. I think this roster is really fun. It's the best roster the Hawks have had in a long time. Maybe the best roster, when I think about the totality of it, that they've ever had in the Trae Young era. In fact, I feel pretty confident by saying it is. I really think this is a Hawks team that is not only capable of being a top 4 seed in the East next season, I think they could be in the conference finals, and that doesn't feel crazy at all to say. Another one of my big winners so far this offseason. Then we get to one of my biggest losers. That's the Los Angeles Lakers. The big news a couple of days ago was LeBron James opting into his player option for $52 million, and that was to be expected. But what wasn't expected was the stuff that Rich Paul said, where he basically kind of seemed to hint that, hey, LeBron is keeping an eye on what the Lakers are doing, and maybe he could request a trade or just leave after this season if the Lakers don't really bring in talent to help him compete for a championship here in one of his final seasons. And it hasn't started off great. The only signing the Lakers make day one of free agency is Jake LaRavia, 2 years, $12 million. And I like him as a shooter with some size. They needed to bring in somebody to replicate a little bit of what Dorian and Finney-Smith can do. Obviously not the defender that DFS is, but he's younger, so I guess gives you a little bit more youth, which the Lakers could absolutely use. But that's it. Like, that's their only signing. They don't have a big. Brook Lopez is gone. He went to the other LA team. We'll talk about that in a bit. Luke Kornet may be an option. He's gone. Clint Capela is gone. Really, the only option out there now is Deandre Ayton, and I feel pretty certain that he's going to end up in Los Angeles at this point. Like, there are not a lot of suitors out there unless he goes to maybe a Milwaukee, but Los Angeles playing alongside LeBron and Luka feels like the most obvious way, in my opinion, for Ayton to rebuild some of his trade value, to have the chance to compete in a potential winning environment. So I would expect DeAndre Ayton to go to the Lakers, but yeah, they kind of struck out to start off free agency. And then you've got Jordan Goodwin's $2.5 million option being picked up, so he's going to be back. Was pretty good defensively and knocked down some threes for the Lakers last season. But yeah, losing Dorian Finney-Smith is a big blow after you gave up capital for him last season to bring him in, and it felt like he was a big-time contributor, one of the more important pieces. You do get Jake LaRavia, but you don't have a big. It feels like your depth is super weak. LeBron, everything's up in the air with him. I don't know. I just feel like easily one of the biggest losers so far the offseason are the Los Angeles Lakers. Sticking out west, let's real quick talk about the Timberwolves re-signings. Naz Reid and Julius Randle here to stay. Naz Reid, 5 years, $125 million. A lot of people talking about that being a big overpay, but you think about $25 million a year in today's NBA for a big who can do kind of a little bit of everything, is your super consistent offensive punch off the bench, won Sixth Man of the Year recently, and is still relatively young too. Like, there is room for him to get better. He's not like a 23-year-old or anything, but I think that contract's going to age perfectly fine, and that's very fair price to pay nowadays for a really good role player on a team that has championship aspirations with Minnesota, who's made back-to-back conference finals. So I think the Naz Reid deal is perfectly fine, and actually really like the Julius Randle one. 3 years, $100 million, just over $33 million a year for Julius Randle, who was phenomenal this past season. I know he didn't look great in the OKC series, but not a lot of players do look great against that defense, and he just completely exceeded all expectations, blew all the former playoff Julius Randle hate out of the water with his performance in round one and round two. I think Randle more than earned himself this payday, more than earned himself his stay here in Minnesota, found a home after it felt like he was probably just going to be a one and done here with the Timberwolves. Instead is a long-term fixture, and I think that's a great thing. That should be great news for Timberwolves fans. It does suck to lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They're going to need step up next season from particularly like a Terrence Shannon Jr. or try and bring in a little bit more outside help on the wing position. I still think they could also use a guard. I don't know who's really out there left, because it sounds like Chris Paul, who hasn't signed yet, is going to like the Clippers or the Suns, and maybe Russell Westbrook, who still is out there, and the Knicks kind of already picked up a guard, but also the Kings are going after him, but they also got Dennis Schroder, who we'll talk about. I don't know. There's a lot of movement on the veteran guard market, and it feels like the Wolves should probably get involved in that. While the Lakers weren't very active, the other LA team was. The Clippers bring back James Harden a few days ago on a 2-year, $81.5 million contract. Second year is a player option. Makes sense. He was great. The Clippers were right there in the midst of the Western Conference, pushed the Nuggets to 7 games in round one. They probably feel like they get a bit more health. They look a little bit better next season with the additions that they're trying to make. Maybe they could go ahead and break through, and they really don't have a choice at this point. They're pretty committed to this group, and I think Harden was worthy of getting another year as the floor general for this team on that type of deal. Brook Lopez is the addition that they made today, 2 years, $18 million. I do like him as a backup big. He's far better than really any backup big option they've had behind Zubac in a long time, maybe ever. But I will say, this is a really old team between Harden and Kawhi, and they brought back Nick Batum, 2 years, $11.5 million, and Brook Lopez. Like, Norman Powell's getting into his 30s. It's a really, really old roster. So that's one of my fears. I do think they got better today with the addition of Brook Lopez. I worry about the overall health of a team that typically isn't healthy and is also finding ways to get older, even though it does feel like on paper, just in terms of personnel, they got better today. That is something I'm a little bit worried about with Los Angeles. Dallas added a much-needed point guard with D'Angelo Russell joining up with the Mavs for 2 years, $13 million. This one had been rumored for a couple of days. He does end up landing there. It makes sense. I mean, they need a ball handler with Kyrie Irving sidelined for potentially all of this season. We'll see if he's able to return this year, but they've got all this front court depth. They need somebody to kind of orchestrate, put it all together. And D'Lo is a fine playmaker. He's streaky shooting, but when he's on, he is on. He is capable of knocking down outside shots. He's not someone that teams are going to just leave wide open. A much better option than anybody else they had on the roster. I'm not like the biggest D'Lo guy in the world, but for the moment, while Kyrie Irving is rehabilitating, I think he's perfectly fine as a stopgap piece. And again, it's not a bad contract whatsoever, just $6.5 million a year. That's pretty good value for someone who can be your starting point guard next season. The Pistons bring in Caris LeVert, 2 years, $29 million. Not the biggest fan. This is one of my least favorite deals, I think, of this day. $14.5 million. Like, it's not terrible for Caris LeVert. The problem is I just don't love him as a player for this Pistons team in particular. Now, this comes on the back half of the news that Malik Beasley is being investigated for potentially being involved in gambling on games. And obviously that puts a big wrench into what their plans were, because all the reports are they were just going to re-sign Malik Beasley and that this really wouldn't even been a possibility, but they had to pivot. And Caris LeVert, he's not like the worst pivot in the world, but he's not a super consistent shooter, nowhere near the shooter that Malik Beasley is. He was one of the best shooters last season, honestly one of the best shooting seasons of all time. He can put the ball on the deck a little bit. Like, he will be, I think, helpful to this Pistons offense, but he's just not really the archetype of player that I really want to see them go for. I mean, rumor is that Dennis Schroder, being gone to Sacramento, I guess I'll talk about that now. Dennis Schroder is going to the Sacramento Kings. I do like that pickup. They desperately needed a point guard of any kind. They've got no point guards on the roster, so they pick him up, and I think him as a ball handler, playing pick and roll with Sabonis, can actually be really effective. But there's a rumor that Malik Monk might be coming back in a sign and trade, with Schroder going to the Kings and Malik Monk going to the Pistons, and I would love if Malik Monk joins up with them. If they get him, then I feel a lot better about the Caris LeVert signing, because Malik Monk fills then a little bit of this ball handling, knockdown shooter role. He is a little bit streaky, but adds some nice athleticism to that roster. So I'll have to reevaluate how I feel about it a little bit if they do get him. Also, Kings get Keon Ellis's option picked up. I think that's good, high-level defender on that team that desperately needs it. And the last thing the Pistons did is Paul Reed, 2 years, $11 million. B-Ball Paul, fine back a big. I absolutely love that Shams called him B-Ball Paul in the tweet. The brand has gone global. So shout out to Paul Reed, and we'll see where the Pistons go. It really sucks that the Malik Beasley thing popped up, because it really just feels like it immediately put this massive damper on everything they were going to try and do this offseason. Sticking out east, the Orlando Magic add another guard, Tyus Jones, 1 year, $7 million. As a bench guy, I think this is perfectly fine, and the Magic could use someone that can orchestrate efficient offense. That is definitely a need of theirs. So he comes into the fold, will back up Jalen Suggs and Desmond Bane over there in that backcourt, playmaking to Paolo and Franz. I think he could be a really good fit here. They also, of course, added Jace Richardson. I think they've done a great job of building out this guard group over there in Orlando to complement their really talented front court, of course, led by Paolo and Franz. And we talk about teams, I mentioned the Hawks earlier, as this potential threat to take a jump in the Eastern Conference. Orlando, I think, is a prime threat if they can stay healthy, which is a big what if, but if they can keep their guys in the court, and you tell me that the Magic are a top 2 to 3 seed next season, I'm not shocked whatsoever. I think they have that capability, especially if jumps come from their young guys. Again, Paolo and Franz particularly. Speaking of Tyus Jones, his brother Tre Jones also gets paid 3 years, $24 million, $8 per year from the Chicago Bulls, sticking with them after he ended up there in the Zach LaVine trade, that 3-teamer coming over from San Antonio at the deadline. I like this pickup. I think this is fine. Gets you a bench point guard, about $8 million a year. Not bad at all for someone who plays the way that Tre Jones does. He's going to be behind Josh Giddey, presumably coming back. Hasn't been signed yet, but as a restricted free agent, all the reports seem to point to him returning, as well as Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu. The Bulls have a pretty good guard rotation, a pretty good young guard rotation at that. I think they've done a good job of building that out. They've got to build out pretty much everything else, but at least for the moment, I think they've got a pretty solid foundation there. Speaking of the Spurs, they signed Luke Kornet, 3 years, $41 million. Luke Kornet, the unicornet, the Kornet contester, gets a bag from San Antonio. I like them adding another big man, getting a little bit of depth behind Victor Wembanyama. I think that was much needed. And Kornet was very, very good last season. A lot of people said this was an overpay, and maybe it's a little bit more than I thought he was going to get looking at some of these other contracts. But the Spurs had money to throw out there, and they wanted to get a really good backup big who is really solid defensively, who is a lob threat, gives them some really good size. Now it's either Wemby or Kornet on the court at all times. It's always going to be a 7-footer out there patrolling the paint. He was really good in limited minutes for the Celtics last year, and with them dealing with injuries, of course, Porzingis being out of the lineup for a lot of the season, he stepped up in a big way. So happy he got his payday, and ultimately, I think this is a better deal than people are giving it credit for. Speaking of the Celtics and bigs, Luka Garza goes over there, 2 years, $5.5 million. Don't have a lot of expectations there. We'll see what he can do. They just desperately needed a big. They've got like nobody at the moment. It's Neemias Queta, it's Xavier Tillman. Al Horford sounds like he could be leaving, not for sure yet, but the Golden State Warriors are really targeting him, so they need somebody. And Luka Garza, somewhat young. It feels like this Celtics team at the moment is just kind of going to take swings and see what they can find, if anybody can stick, whether it's Anthony Simons if he does end up staying, or it's a Luka Garza. Who knows if Georges Niang is here to stay around? I don't really know. No idea what the Celtics roster is going to look like next season, and Garza feels like he could either stay or go by the time next summer rolls around. It feels like it's just a trial period for almost almost everybody for the Celtics that they bring in over the course of this summer. Speaking of the East, Jordan Clarkson goes ahead and lands with the New York Knicks. He gets cut by the Utah Jazz, who really just fumbled the trade value of him and Colin Sexton greatly. That's actually something I forgot to write down on here too. Colin Sexton goes to the Charlotte Hornets. Jusuf Nurkic and a second round pick goes with Colin Sexton for Jusuf Nurkic. I don't know what the Jazz are doing. There's no way Sexton's value was that low that you had to attach a pick to him to get Jusuf Nurkic back, who I think is just bad at this point. I guess he can give you some okay minutes as a backup big. I just think Utah is doing a lot of weird stuff over there, and that includes having to buy out Jordan Clarkson. They let his value and Colin Sexton just completely run out. They should have traded them both a year or 2 years ago when they had a lot more juice. They instead just let their trade value wilt away. We'll see if they're able to get something for John Collins, but I just feel like there have been a lot of missteps in their rebuild recently, but he lands with the Knicks. It's not like he's even that great at this point, but I think he'll be a better option than some of the other guys they had coming off the bench this season. The Milwaukee Bucks are seemingly just running this thing back. They bring back Kevin Porter Jr., 2 years, $11 million. He was pretty good for them at the end of last season, although at the moment he probably is going to be their starting point guard, and I think that's not at all something you can have, but the Bucks probably don't have much of a choice. They're pretty capped out when it comes to money and the ability to trade for literally anybody. So they also bring back Bobby Portis, 3 years, $44 million. Really don't think he should be their starting big either, but again, they might not have a choice. Gary Trent Jr. comes back. I think that's a great return. He was phenomenal for them in that series against the Pacers and one of their more reliable role players all season. Taurean Prince comes back too. Also perfectly fine, I guess. I just think the Bucks are stuck in this absolute limbo. There's no way for them to be any sort of threat in the Eastern Conference next season with Dame's money just dead on the books and him dealing with that season-ending injury. It's really unfortunate because if Dame could play, I mean, this roster is still kind of terrible around Dame and Giannis, but at least maybe they could be somewhat competitive in a pretty wide open Eastern Conference. The Cleveland Cavaliers over the last few days traded for Lonzo Ball. I talked about this a little bit in my Eastern Conference preview video, or just talking about how insane the East could be, but I like the deal for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think Lonzo as this playmaking defensive guard can give them something that they really need, a little bit more size at that guard position, assuming he can be healthy, which is a big what if, a massive what if, one of the biggest ones in all of the league for Lonzo Ball, who's played like 40 games in the last 3-4 seasons. But in theory, Lonzo makes a lot of sense. Also a knockdown shooter. Isaac Okoro, I don't mind the Bulls taking a little bit of a flyer on him, but the Bulls, again, don't get a first-round pick or a pick of any kind for another one of those players from that really good team back in 2021 that felt like they could have gotten them a lot of value in return, but no first-round pick for Zach LaVine, nothing for DeMar DeRozan, nothing for Lonzo now. We'll see on the Nikola Vucevic front, but for the moment, they just have gotten no draft capital whatsoever. And then Sam Merrill gets 4 years, $38 million from the Cavs, knockdown shooter. I think that is a perfectly fine deal. And with a guy like Sam Merrill, who is so consistent, so knockdown, it's perfectly fine. Over back in the West, my Oklahoma City Thunder, just make a couple of small things happen. AJ Mitchell, 3 years, $9 million. He is returning. I think that is a great contract if you didn't watch the Thunder last season early on in the year, or, just especially don't know a lot about AJ Mitchell. Second round rookie who had some really good moments, was at, I think, like 50, 40, 80, some splits, something around those lines when he played. Very limited minutes, wasn't getting a ton of run, but I think he could be so good as a bench ball handler next season and just gives us more depth. Jay Will, Jalen Williams, 3 years, $24 million. Really good defense on Nikola Jokic in the second round. Really has evolved as a shooter, as a playmaking hub big. Anytime Chet and Hartenstein were out, Jay Will was going crazy. He was putting up triple doubles. I think that is a great contract for him. And then Dylan Jones in a second traded to the Wizards to clear up a roster space for Thomas Sorber, who we drafted 15th. Shout out to NBA champion Dylan Jones. Good luck in Washington. I actually think I could have some pretty good moments there. I liked a lot of what I saw from him this season. Rounding out the final few deals, Kevon Looney to the Pelicans, 2 years, $16 million. I really thought Kevon Looney was just going to be a Warriors lifer, but he goes to New Orleans, and I don't really understand this a lot for the Pelicans. I mean, I guess they had money, but you just traded an unprotected swap from yourself or Milwaukee next season to move up and get Derek Queen. You've already got Yves Meese. It feels like those should be your bigs unless they think Queen can play the 4 a little bit. They're looking to do a double big situation, but that sounds disgusting next to Zion Williamson, and none of these bigs feel like they really fit next to Zion. The Pelicans are the biggest disaster in the NBA right now, if you ask me, just roster-wise. I have no idea what they're doing. They made the weird CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole trade that I still don't know how I feel about it. They've got young players, but also feels like they still got all these remnants from their old core. I really don't know what to think at all about the Pelicans right now. It's super strange that they bring Kevon Looney out of all free agents. The Sixers pick up Trendon Watford, 2 years, $5.3 million. I actually like this pickup a lot. I think this is one that could fly under the radar. Gives them a 6'9" guy who can handle the ball, actually play power forward, which the Sixers don't have a lot of those guys, especially assuming that they lose Yabu, which it sounds like that is a possibility. Can shoot the three ball a bit. I think Watford is going to be pretty solid. He's not like a huge game changer for Philly, but I think he could give them real rotational minutes. Mason Plumlee goes back to the Hornets after a few years being gone. Makes sense. They need a big. They got rid of Mark Williams. They just traded away Yusuf Nurkic for Colin Sexton. Well, actually, like quite a bit over there in Charlotte. I think grabbing a ball handler like him adds a lot to that team, gives them a lot more of an offensive dynamic in the backcourt next to LaMelo Ball. Excited to see what that duo can do. Davion Mitchell re-signed with the Miami Heat a few days ago, 2 years, $24 million. Great defense, great shooting for them after it came over at the trade deadline. It was great in the play-in tournament. Just feels like a Heat culture type of player, and they need more talent in the backcourt. Like him there a lot. Garrett Temple back to the Toronto Raptors. Joe Ingles, 1 year, $3.6 million back to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Sure, on both those fronts. And finally, Colin Gillespie to the Phoenix Suns, as well as Nigel Hayes-Davis, who comes back to the NBA after going overseas for a little bit. And according to some people who have watched him, have scouted him, because I have not, say that he's improved and could end up being maybe not quite to the caliber Yabu was, but this year's kind of Yabu type player where he comes back from overseas and starts to really carve out a niche for himself in the NBA. So maybe he is a sneaky pickup for the Phoenix Suns. But that is, as far as I know, every single move that has happened, at least up until midnight here on the East Coast. I set that cutoff. I said after that, any other moves I'll talk about in future videos. Like we're just getting a report from Shams that like LeBron could seriously consider playing elsewhere to end his career if the Lakers aren't ready to compete for championship, and we'll have to see on that front. Maybe I'll be making a LeBron James requested a trade video at some point here soon this summer. But in general, that's every single move that happened day one of free agency and leading up to it. Let me know again in the comments how you feel about your favorite team's day one of free agency. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were you someone in the middle? What would you grade it? What was your favorite move, your least favorite move from just the NBA landscape as a whole? And give me some other predictions you think we could see over the offseason or for the rest of free agency. There are still some big names out in the market. Jonathan Kuminga, still, where is he going to potentially go? Russell Westbrook still out there, among some others. Deandre Ayton, it feels like he's probably going to be a Laker, but maybe they strike out on him too. We'll have to wait and see. But for the moment, again, I appreciate you watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.